Not all of these people may be on board with Trump, but they're all against Biden. As McConnell said, "That could pass the Green New Deal, and that would be a tragedy." So the roundup reported last week that it looked like House Republicans would let the US government shut down Saturday at midnight. As time wore on, Republican hardliners insisted on adding poison pill amendments to appropriation bills. They drafted bills that violated the agreement negotiated with President Biden when fights over the debt ceiling bill almost shut down the government in May, as well as put our country into default. At the time, McCarthy committed to the spending negotiated with the president, and 2/3 of Republicans voted to pass the debt ceiling bill. But MAGA members of the House responded with anger, and despite the majority vote to accept the debt ceiling bill, they immediately began plotting to strip out the negotiated spending. The House did manage to pass 4 of 12 bills necessary to fund the government for the next fiscal year, but they bickered and fought tooth and nail about every single one. They took to the floor of the House and threw pop shots at each other. Throughout this process, Republican Speaker Kevin McCarthy tried to keep his commitments to the extremists in his conference, while basically ignoring the rest of his members. This caused even more public bickering, with non-MAGA members complaining about the MAGA members to the press. Meanwhile, the Senate moved forward with its own continuing resolution, a stopgap measure to fund the government while the parties worked out disagreements, waited for the House to come to its senses. In literally the 11th hour before a shutdown would have occurred, McCarthy managed to pass a continuing resolution with the help of House Democrats. The continuing resolution passed the House with a vote of 395 to 91, with all Democrat votes saying yes. The angry reaction from the MAGA wing, most of whom are part of the House Freedom Caucus, was immediate. Freedom Caucus members are highliners who are staunchly against working across the aisle on pretty much anything. Their actions are driven by their relationship to the former president, who has pulled strings behind the scenes for weeks in an effort to shut down the government. Their rhetoric to the press was that if there was a shutdown, it would be the fault of Democrats. A laughable contention, to say the least. Democrats were dead set against the shutdown and accepted the continuing resolution despite there being no emergency funding for Ukraine, which was a concession McCarthy was forced to make to the Freedom Caucus in order to keep the government open. Nonetheless, the Democrats joined 130 Republicans to pass the continuing resolution to keep the government open for 45 additional days. The Senate immediately passed the CR, and President Biden signed the CR into law at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, just half an hour before a shutdown would have occurred. Now, the drama around the speaker's seat is something that happened immediately after this. The most visible members of the Freedom Caucus were predictably incensed that McCarthy worked with Democrats to keep the government open. Representative Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida, immediately began threatening to make a motion to vacate the speaker's seat.
I do intend to file a motion to vacate against Speaker McCarthy this week.
Gaetz appeared on various media outlets over the weekend saying that McCarthy working with Democrats to fund the government was unacceptable. He said he would move to vacate the speaker's seat. Gaetz glibly told the media that McCarthy could work with his new boss, Hakeem Jeffries, but he wouldn't be doing it from the speaker's seat. On Monday, Gaetz introduced a resolution to vacate the speaker. On Tuesday, the House gathered for a vote on Gaetz' motion. Now, there had been some talk over the weekend that McCarthy would rely on Democrats' votes to keep him in the speaker's chair. But McCarthy had spent the weekend condemning the Democrats and trying to shift the blame for the chaotic process to pass the CR from his own caucus to Jeffries and the Democrats.
If we shut the government down, the border agents don't get paid. The border is even further wide open. The president wants to ignore this problem. We're not going to allow him. He wants to ignore governing. He's the president of the United States. What has he done about keeping government open? Well, I'll tell you this. We are putting something on the floor that will continue to pay our troops. And if he wants to lobby against it and tell Democrats to vote against it, then the shutdown is on him.
Why not?
Anybody that was paying attention to this process at all should know that that was a laughable proposition. Even as Gaetz queued up the motion to vacate, McCarthy dismissed the notion that he would be removed from the speaker's role, saying on Twitter, quote, "Bring it on." He maintained an outward attitude of confidence right up until the House voted to vacate the chair. Some pundits have said that Gaetz caught flat-footed when the vote resulted in McCarthy's removal. He felt sure that Democrats would keep him in the speaker's role. But the Democrats ultimately sided with 8 members of the Freedom Caucus, and for the first time in the history of our government, the Speaker of the House was removed. Kevin McCarthy had held the position for just 9 months, almost to the day. The last 2 Republican speakers, Paul Ryan and John Boehner, retired from Congress after clashes with their right wing, and there are rumors now that McCarthy may resign as well. The deposed speaker is not barred from running again, but McCarthy has said that I
believe I can continue to fight, maybe in a different manner. I will not run for speaker again. I'll have the conference pick somebody else. I hope you realize that every day I did the job, regardless whether you underestimated me or not, I wanted to do it with a smile.
In the immediate aftermath of McCarthy's removal, it was clear that no one, including Matt Gaetz, had a plan for what to do next. There was an almost immediate motion to recess the House for 1 week, while the Republican conference tries to figure out who should be the next speaker. The recess has caused even deeper bitterness in the Republican conference, and those who aren't hardliners and extremists are indicating that they are fed up. According to Politico, the history-making spectacle that played out on the House floor on Tuesday amounted to stepping on a rake heading into an election year, as one Republican lawmaker put it. McCarthy's loss to 8 rebel Republicans is the latest and most acute example of a party now so racked by division that it cannot govern itself, let alone the country. The GOP's tiny House majority and poor communication across the Capitol has rendered it feeble and feckless. When Gaetz finally made good on his long-standing threats to force a vote to topple McCarthy, his Republican colleagues were so fed up with him, they wouldn't let him debate from within their own caucus. Gaetz was banished to the minority Democratic side of the room. In other words, he had to use the mic the Democrats gave him. Some people say that this was a bad move on Democrats' part, but as I described last night in the Not Another Leftist podcast, I think that that was probably actually a decent move done by Democrats to hurry up and get this thing over with, rather than letting it go into like some sort of shouting match. It still revealed the divisions, and it sped the process up a little bit. Now, lawmakers say that Gaetz' successful fight to remove McCarthy from the speakership has cost him in his own conference. On Tuesday, reports said House Republicans were considering expelling Gaetz from the caucus entirely. Quote, "I'd love to have him out of the conference," Nebraska Republican Representative Don Bacon told reporters on Tuesday. He shouldn't be in the Republican Party. Representative Garrett Graves, Republican of Louisiana, said the repercussions for Gaetz would be pursued in the conference. Within a House GOP that has in recent years devoured its own, ostracizing members who have spoken out against former President Donald Trump and the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol, so far, only Gaetz seems to be at risk of formal dismissal. Note here that we are talking about dismissal from the conference, in other words, not being allowed to caucus with the GOP formally within the House. This is not a removal from the House itself, just for clarity's sake. Now, we have an interim speaker in McHenry, and he has taken the gavel. And according to Reuters, immediately following Tuesday's 216 to 210 ouster vote, Republican Representative Patrick McHenry, a McCarthy ally, was appointed acting Speaker pro tem. He can serve for only a very limited time, up to 3 legislative days in this case. The acting Speaker pro tem's duties are very vague, according to a guide to Chambers rules and procedures. Quote, "That person may exercise such authorities of the office of Speaker as may be necessary and appropriate pending the election of a Speaker or Speaker pro tem." In other words, he can pretty much only oversee a election of another speaker, not very much else. Now, there might be some wiggle room, legally speaking, on doing other things here, but generally speaking, this is what he is limited to. And we are in new territory with this. This has never happened before in our country's history. Again, Republican Representative Kelly Armstrong told reporters that McHenry's main task will be to get us a new speaker. Any further, he said, would spark a move to oust McHenry himself. This division among Republicans is unprecedented, and so far, there are no signs that the chaos will subside. And this extreme disarray has led concerns for GOP heading into the 2024 election as well. According to Politico, the longer the disarray drags on, the tougher next year's elections are likely to become. Several battleground seat incumbents openly acknowledge that Gates' successful drive to boot McCarthy, quote, weakens our position. The next GOP speaker, whomever he or she is, will almost certainly have to rely on Democrats to fund the government, given the antipathy on the right for stopgap spending bills. Republicans hope that the House control could lead to big policy wins, are close to being dashed and forgotten. And furthermore, until a House Speaker is installed, it is unlikely that further action will be taken on bills to fund the government as well. Lawmakers are facing a November 17th deadline to provide more money, or again, face a partial government shutdown. Partial here because some parts of the government are mandatory report parts of the government. Military, police, other things. These parts of the government will have to report for duty and still have the government function, but will not be paid while doing so. This includes the Federal Aviation Administration, which controls traffic controllers. And famously, traffic controllers during the last extended government shutdown walked off the job, preventing flights from taking off, except in some extreme circumstances, which led to people not being able to travel and brought the economy almost to a grinding halt, which is why the last shutdown was ended eventually, or at least one of the bigger reasons that has happened. So what is going to happen next? Well, the House's 221 Republicans and 212 Democrats are huddling privately to figure out their next steps, both politically and legislatively. Each party was expected to try to settle on a candidate for Speaker. That's easy for Democrats. They are solidly behind Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who ran for Speaker in January against McCarthy and other candidates. Given the increasing bitterness in their conference, Republicans will no doubt have a harder time settling on a candidate. They will be forced to negotiate with a small group of hardline MAGA extremists who continue to seek very deep cuts in federal spending, despite the majority passage of the debt ceiling bill. The House now finds itself in an unprecedented moment. Let us now turn over to NBC News with some further reporting on this chaos.
This morning, Congress is at a standstill and scrambling for a speaker.
Is there any guidance you can give folks about what happens next?
I'm sorry, I can't at this point.
The House out of session until next Tuesday, even as Congress has just over 40 days to reach a deal and prevent a shutdown. Military salaries, critical government services, and U.S. aid for Ukraine, all hanging in the balance.
So one thing I want to bring up here specifically is that there's wide agreement about paying military members and offering critical government services. The primary thing that there's a lot of disagreement on, and the population is moving away from, is U.S. aid for Ukraine. As the Ukraine war drags on longer and the gains that the Ukrainian military are making becomes thinner, that support for Ukraine aid will diminish. This doesn't mean that Ukraine aid won't happen, but it might take a different flavor than the US government simply guaranteeing loans and promises to the Ukrainian government and giving them equipment directly. We might see some more indirect forms of aid, whether it be, selling equipment to allies at maybe a reduced cost, and then those allies turning around and giving them more equipment that they have on hand, or something of that nature. Maybe a conglomerate of NATO nations coming together to all guarantee a loan for Ukraine rather than it just being backstopped by primarily the US government. Again, most of the aid that the Ukrainians have received so far has been in-kind aid. That means that they've gotten equipment, loan guarantees, and supplies from the US government, particularly in terms of ammunition and, again, heavy equipment. Because the government does accrual accounting, this is denominated in dollars so that the government can understand everything that goes in and out of its pocketbooks, but it's not like a direct cash advance to the Ukrainian government. It's not like a blank check. Most of this, again, is in the form of equipment, guaranteed loans for equipment that just basically circles back to the United States and other countries and produces jobs in manufacturing of arms and equipment. So this notion that it's either Ukrainian aid or anything else is really not what it is, even at a surface level. But on top of that, most of the people that are for getting rid of Ukrainian aid aren't for giving aid to the people in the United States or other countries in their home country. It is a false dichotomy. It is a false choice being offered by these. So that's what we have there. Now, the leaders of both parties will have to decide when they are ready to enter into the process of electing a speaker. The January endeavor was sloppy, as McCarthy for days could not get enough votes to win and had to endure 15 rounds of voting. It would be at least as chaotic this time for Republicans, unless they conclude that such chaos is creating a public backlash that could doom their election prospects in 2024. And they unite around a candidate. Now, who wants to be Speaker of the House, though, under all these things? Not only who wants to be, but who can be. So under the U.S. Constitution, the House Speaker does not have to be a member of Congress. Some Republicans have floated the name of former President Donald Trump for the job. After initially saying he was focused on his presidential run, Trump is considering making a trip to the Capitol, according to reporting from the Rolling Stone. Such a visit would be the first time the former president has visited the building since a mob of his supporters breached it in a violent riot on January 6th of 2021. Some would even say an insurrection. Some people have been found guilty of an insurrectionist plot. We'll let you decide. And multiple outlets have reported on Thursday that the former president is mulling a trip next week ahead of the vote. Politico noted that he is open to pitching himself as a candidate, citing a Republican familiar with internal discussions. A source familiar with Trump's recent private discussions told Rolling Stones that Trump has indeed uttered that he is open to the possibility of a speakership run. Some members of the House have confirmed they will run for Speaker as well. It's reported that one of those members is Steve Scalise, though he has blood cancer and will be getting treatment for the illness in the immediate future. Representative Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, will also make a bid for the gavel. We should note here that both of these people are actually fairly popular within their conference. Jim Jordan for his rough and tumble antagonistic positions when it comes to trying to take on Democrats within the House Judiciary Committee, and Steve Scalise because he's remained a stalwart of Republican and conservatism despite getting shot, and partly because he was shot by a left-wing lunatic a few years ago. And you get some solidarity when you don't become anti-gun or anti-conservative or change your political beliefs despite of a personal attack that you suffered. Let us now turn back to ABC News here for some additional reporting.
Now, it's possible this field could continue to grow. Oklahoma Republican Congressman Kevin Hern is now gauging support, also considering getting in, putting his hat into the ring to run for Speaker. Republicans, though, are hoping to avoid another embarrassment and get this done quickly. They're eyeing early next week, but getting all of House Republicans on the same page is not going to be easy. And many Republicans that I've talked with up here are skeptical that they can actually pull this off that quickly. They fear, Robin, that this could drag on.
Yeah, so we'll note here, like we have already said, that it's likely going to have to be a few rounds of voting. There's going to be some horse trading, especially if two people are engaged within the House Speaker fight this time around. The moderate wing of the Republican Party, they're not too wedded to MAGA specifically, but they're pretty much on line with almost everything that is on the agenda, aren't really here for the, what's a good way to say this? They aren't here for the type of people that are making a circus out of the process and basically not wanting to govern anything at all here. Okay. So that's where they're kind of at. And because those people actually exist within the conference, it's possible that Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan will have a fight on their hands because they might not be able to coalesce a large enough portion of those members into a solid block to win the speakership. And you know, given that the Republican conference has majorities so thinly, it's probably not going to be one and done. Unless during this week that they're in recess right now, there's a lot of backroom deals that are made and they come out and they just do it like that. Future Cypher here with a quick update. So while we were recording and editing this video, it seems as though that Trump has officially endorsed Jim Jordan on his social media site. He praised him and said that he was a wonderful person and that he was really MAGA. So this means that the process that this will happen might be a little bit quicker than we originally reported in this video. But there is still the smallest possibility of less MAGA Republicans throwing a monkey wrench into this whole process, depending on how afraid they are of Trump and his base. But given the realities of the Republican Party at this juncture, the likelihood of it not going quickly is actually pretty slim. All right, so that's the end of that little segment here. Now, let's talk about this rule. So the rule was really pushed by 20 or so of members of the Freedom Caucus. This is MTG, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, Chip Roy, among others, that really wanted it to be like basically a sword of Damocles that hung over the head of McCarthy so they could push him around and kind of get what they wanted. And it's bit them in the ass. I mean, it hasn't bit them specifically in the ass, but it's bit Republicans in the ass by making the conference more chaotic, by making it to where they can't get bills passed, by making it to where the people's business is not being done, and showing that this deep division that is within the Republican Party right now, partly due to the fact that they don't have that much power since they only control the House and by very thin margin, that they aren't able to get things done. They aren't able to get things that people want done. Compare that to the 2020 to 2022 House, where things were getting done on a bipartisan basis. With Biden, with the CHIPS Act, the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, some movement on guns, some movement on a number of other different things that are very much needed in order for the economy to have rebounded from COVID, as well as to buttress up our defenses and our ability to produce things at home, given another possible global pandemic or war overseas that could impact supply chains. All these things were very important, and I'm sure that people actually care about them. They might not know about it as much as we would like. You know, we being people that are politically engaged every day, which is why I do this program, partly because I want to give people the kind of information that these things are important and hopefully break that bubble a little bit to show that, yes, things that passed 2 years ago are positively impacting you today. Clear example of this: the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act gave people subsidies and city subsidies in order to lower the cost for new equipment, things that are more energy efficient. One of those things is the ability to go out and buy a new dishwasher or washer, dryer, whatever, that meet a certain rating and have, I want to say, like instant rebates of like a couple $100 on those items in order to, you know, help fight climate change, but also in order to encourage built in America. Those two things combined will save people money and also generate economic activity, which is what we want. We want that to happen a lot because it helps everybody out. And so if more people are aware of these things, then we can actually get more things accomplished because people's material conditions are directly impacted. That's not to say that everything is rosy, mind you. No, of course not. Not everything is peachy. But these things are important. And the fact that Republicans can't get anything done whatsoever, especially in the House, is telling. Maybe they just don't want to govern. But let us continue on, though. So CBS News reported that the immediate challenge for Republicans is moving past the extraordinary strife that's plagued their conference in recent weeks, which we've been talking about this entire segment. The raw feelings were apparent at a closed-door meeting Tuesday evening, where members unloaded their anger at the 8 Republicans who joined with Democrats to depose of McCarthy. Representative Mike Kelly, Republican of Pennsylvania, pointed at the lawmakers who voted against McCarthy and said, quote, "I've never been part of a worse team," according to a Republican in the room who has granted anonymity to discuss the private session. Reuters reported that even though many lawmakers saw the day coming, they were stunned that Republicans actually dumped their own leader. Quote, "I've been here for a while and I've seen a lot, but I've never seen this," Democratic Representative Jim McGovern told Reuters. House Democrat leader Hakeem Jeffries urged, quote, traditional Republicans in the House to do the following, quote, "Walk away from MAGA extremism and join us in partnership for the good of the country," a reference to a former President Donald Trump's Make America Great Again slogan. This is called the Grand Coalition idea. In other words, we'll enter a deal, Democrats and Republicans, people that want government to function on both sides, come together and enter in a grand coalition government within the House in order to get things passed. Funding the government, doing things against China, helping to fund Ukraine's defense against Russia aggression, among other things. Whether or not this will play out is still to be determined, but it's what we would like to see, kind of. And I say kind of because, you know, at the end of the day, I don't really want a lot of the things the Republicans want. I don't want the government to shut down. I want bills to be passed. I want good bills to be passed. I want ones that people can agree on. 60% of Americans agree that we need some sort of, universal background check system. 60-70% of Americans agree that we need to lower healthcare costs. 60-70% of Americans agree that we need to do a number of different things, reduce marijuana conviction rates, legalize marijuana, lower prescription drug prices, get more K through 12 education funding, get more universal childcare funding, etc., etc., etc. If a grand bargain can be reached where some of these things become a reality, maybe improving the earned income tax credit, especially for people that have children, it'd be a good thing. So one can dream, even if it seems a little bit too West Wing. Shout out to some of the nerdies out there, but it's probably not going to happen, simply because that kind of grand bargain would specifically help President Biden going into 2024. So it is what it is. Continuing on, though, the crisis also significantly detracts from Republicans' hopes to fix the public's focus on an impeachment inquiry into Democratic President Joe Biden and immigration troubles at the southwest U.S. border with Mexico. They want Joe Biden to be investigated. They want to tarnish his ability to go into 2024. They want the narrative that he's somehow beholden to China or any number of different things, and he's a corrupt SOB, despite the fact that we have little to no evidence of any of their claims. Granted, his son Hunter traded on his name. That's bad. Hunter should probably be strung up and put in jail, given anything that he did that was actually legal. A lot of it's not. That's the problem. But they want to be able to diminish Biden's chances of winning in 2024. Not all of these people may be on board with Trump, but they're all against Biden. As McConnell said during the January 6th stuff, that could pass the Green New Deal. And that would be a tragedy. Again, they like Democrats less than they like doing things that are good. So that's the problem here. And not only that, but it also takes eyes, to an extent, off of what's happening at the border. And border issue is actually pummeling Biden pretty badly. Say what you want about the busing of migrants from Texas to New York City and other northeastern states. It is negatively impacting people's perception of what is happening with immigration. Maybe you don't like it. Maybe you think it's wrong for Republicans to do this, but it is a masterful political play. And anything that detracts from that is making that play less effective. So they want to keep focusing on it. You and I might think that the reason that we're having this immigration problem is partly due to policies that Trump enacted and decades of neglect of trying to fix the southern border as well as immigration reform generally. Republicans squashed it when there was the possibility of having comprehensive immigration reform. Gang of 8 became Gang of 6, and then therefore it died. Thanks, Rubio, you fucking douchebag. But these are the things that we're having to deal with. And because we have to deal with this, it is negatively impacting Joe Biden's ability to win and making him do things that might seem a bit Trump-esque. For example, the border wall is being constructed. Construction of border fencing at key points that the Customs and Border Patrol and ICE say that are issues, that are having issues of people crossing there. You and I probably agree that it won't work. It might slow it down a little bit, but ultimately it'll be easily circumvented, and it's ultimately not where the point should be. But people want something done. You and I might say that, hey, Congress needs to get off its ass, authorize work visas for people that are seeking asylum, and also change the law so that we can either quickly get their cases adjudicated or have more say on the border agents' own task to like send them back and deny their asylum claims just outright because they're not believable enough or whatever, or maybe change the law about asylum seeking so that they have to apply for asylum in a third country that's a safe harbor country or within their own countries. But all those things right now, if Biden were to do it, and he's tried to do some of those things, are illegal. The courts have stopped him because that is not what the US law says. Now, Republicans might be fine with that. Just ignore the courts, make them enforce it. But liberals typically actually listen to the courts, and they don't like to abuse power. They constitutionally are like, this is why a lot of people say Democrats don't have spines, because they don't like doing those things, right? They don't like doing it. So that's where we're at. And so Biden is doing something in order to show that something is being done. And it's helping Republicans. Every time that he adds fencing, Republicans will be like, see, the border wall is needed. Anytime he does anything like that, anytime he says something that like shows that maybe he wasn't completely honest or forthright about what he knew about his son, like, I'm like, see, he's trying to cover something up. And all this fighting about the speakership is making people not pay attention to that as much. Now, continuing on to wrap this up a little bit, for their part, McCarthy and his fellow Republicans had hoped to make those twin issues the centerpiece of the 2024 congressional and presidential campaigns, along with inflation. But the dysfunction of the House Republicans has taken center stage, and at this moment, it's impossible to say how long it will last. And as we said, that's a good thing for Democrats and a bad thing for Republicans.